I am going to be going through what an abortion entails in a fair amount of detail. So this is your caveat. I won't be offended if you need to step out. If you need to do that, then go for it. Just letting you know, I will be covering a fair amount of detail as to what happens in an abortion. But in a 1791 speech in the House of Commons, William Wilberforce reminded those listening of the following. He said, "Having heard all of this, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you did not know." Having heard all of this, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you did not know. How many of us Christians are looking the other way when it comes to abortion? We're too fearful of what the world might say, might ridicule, might do to us if we stand up for what we know is right. How many of us willingly turn a blind eye to the needs of expectant mothers who are frightened and nervous, who are lied to by abortion providers and given no information on other options or told what an abortion actually is? How many of us want to do something, but we feel so ill-equipped and don't even know how to begin to have these conversations about the unborn? Let me ask you this: what would it take for you to engage in those hard conversations? Would it take the knowledge that as I give this talk, 5,500 unborn children will be aborted, just as I'm speaking to you? Would it take knowing that since the legalization of abortion in 1973, 2.8 billion babies have been aborted? And for some context, the Holocaust killed 6 million. 2.8 billion. We have a cry and a yearning in our hearts for justice, right? So why is it then do we turn a blind eye from the reality of abortion? Why is this even up for debate in some churches, in friend groups, in our families? Why is this a point of contention? It feels so clear. And I believe it's because we aren't equipped. We don't know how to have these conversations. It's scary. And it's a lot easier for us to shrug our shoulders and say, oh, yeah, I know what I believe, but I don't really know enough about it to talk about it. Or I'm a man and it's a woman's issue. It happens a lot. But today my prayer is that you will leave this session equipped to engage in really hard conversations about abortion and to make a difference and to come alongside pregnant mothers, helping them choose life and to make a rational and an evidence-based case for life. And to use these conversations as a way to share the gospel, which is our end result that we want. And it's my prayer that after this, you will be propelled to go and make a difference, to earnestly pray for change and to stand up for the unborn in Southland, in New Zealand, and to navigate this with truth and with love. I'm going to begin with another caveat and say, I am not an expert in statistics, in medicine. I'm not an expert on this subject, but I don't believe you need to be to do something. You don't need to be an expert to understand this. Anyone, women and men, all you really need to prove is the second point that we made there. And people who are for abortion will hopefully see that our position is not about taking away women's rights. It's about protecting human life. And that our position is a logical one, not a degrading one. I want you to imagine one day you were out shopping at Foursquare, which I've since noticed is a 1 minute walk away from here. You're out shopping at Foursquare, or maybe you've decided to push the boat out a bit and go for a big supermarket like Gore New World. And the checkout lady asks you, out of nowhere, would you kill it? You have no idea what she's talking about. You're confused. You probably stop and think for a moment. But what would you say back? I'm going to ask, Dad, what would you say back if you were asked that? Would you kill it?
Would I kill what?
Exactly. You'd ask, would I kill what, or what is it? And this is because you need context before you can answer. Before making a decision as big as that, you need to know what it is. And giving this context is also what we must do when we make the case for life or engage in dialogue about abortion. There are many who advocate for abortion who just don't know about basic fetal development. And for some, all it takes to change their mind on this, about the morality of abortion, is the knowledge of what happens at conception, or that a baby's heart starts beating at about 21 days, or that you can feel pain as early as 12 weeks. And this won't be the case for everyone, but we, as in this room, should all know basic facts about conception and fetal development to use in our conversations about abortion. Our pro-choice culture, our lawmakers, our politicians, and some abortion providers will over and over again say that abortion is justified because a fetus is not a human being. In discussions on this, I've heard it referred to as a clump of cells or fetal tissue or even a tumor or a parasite. And if we use this non-human language, we are disregarding basic biology around what happens at conception. So now we're gonna go through that because it's fundamental to defending the pro-life position. If prenatal personhood is established, the case for abortion collapses. So at the moment of conception, where sperm has travelled through the cervix to the fallopian tube and it meets the egg, the sperm and the egg exchange DNA from the mother and father. And in this very moment, a unique genetic code is created. 23 sets of chromosome pairs are formed, and this unique genetic code instantly determines that human's sex, their eye color, their hair color, everything that characterizes that human is coded for in that very moment of conception. And this single-celled zygote, which is the stage of life before fetus, is new human life. It's undeniable. Where DNA is created, we can be sure human life has been created. And this is so important to know and use, because without this clear objective reasoning, this one pinpoint that we can make, all of our measures for human life become arbitrary. And when human life becomes arbitrary, as we see throughout history, injustice will happen. We need an objective standard. We need to be able to pinpoint it. This is conception. This is also where we need to understand and have a good gauge on the language we're using, because there's various words used to describe what is inside the mother. And this can also get confusing. Whether it's a zygote or an embryo or a fetus, we need to make it clear that these words are simply stages of development. You were once in the zygote stage, and it is the term for that brief first stage of life, and it is Greek for joined or yoked. What two things have just joined? Sperm and egg. Then, as you developed, you progressed into the embryo stage. Until you were about 7 weeks, when your heartbeat began. And this word embryo is Greek for I grow. From there, your development was characterized as the fetal stage until birth, and this is the stage in which you were able to feel pain. Again, this terminology is important. Fetus is Latin for little one. Little what? Little human. And none of these names, no matter which one we use, indicate non-human. They are simply stages of development. And to say any of these words indicate anything less than human is just not biologically correct. Again, we're making an evidence-based case for life, and this is it. And just to be clear, those stages of development, those names, don't just happen inside the womb. They never stop. You went from being a fetus to a newborn, then to an infant or a toddler. Then you became a child, then an adolescent, then an adult. And finally, you will be elderly. None of these terms are any more or less human than another. They are simply terms for life stages, and it is the same in the womb. And unfortunately, some still refuse to accept this scientific certainty. What they don't realize, however, is by doing so, and putting a question mark on when life is created, they are also making a case against abortion. This is where we ask, when does life begin, if not at conception? And more often than not, they're not completely sure. They can't be. They say, it might be a heartbeat, or maybe when they can feel pain. Or in some cases, you'll find people who say it's not until they're outside of the womb do they become human. But in all cases, they can't prove that to be objectively true. And to that, I would say, imagine you were working for a demolition company. You were told to blow up a building, and right before you did, you saw some movement in the window. You're not entirely sure what it was. Maybe it was some wind moving. Maybe it was a curtain. Maybe it was the shadow of a bird or someone in the building. You're not 100% sure. Would you still push the button and demolish the building? Would you still blow up the building knowing there might be someone in there? Or another example, you're out hunting and you're about to take your shot because a bush is rustling in front of you, but you're not entirely sure if that's an animal in front of you or your best mate who you've gone out hunting with. Would you still open fire? No one would. It's not politics, it's common sense. We also need to point out the huge double standard our society has. On one hand, a fetus is not a human, but on the other, what do we have? Baby showers. Celebrating the life that's inside the mother, right? We're not saying there's some clump of cells inside there. We're celebrating that life. We're buying presents. We're excited. On a much sadder note, what happens when a mother tragically miscarries? This is a part of a lot of women's lives. Can you imagine telling that woman she is not grieving the loss of a human life? It was just tissue. No, that would be one of the most cruel things you could ever say to someone. And it gets more hypocritical. You can even see here that there are countless headlines out there of women who tragically lost their what? Their unborn child. Here's a few. Woman killed in Queenstown crash. This was actually last month. This happened. Was expecting baby. Going on to read, they were expecting a child, mourning the tragic loss of their unborn baby. This was in the news. This is also the language we use in cases of homicide or manslaughter. See this. The brother of a pregnant woman found dead, charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. How can you be charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder if that's not human life in the womb? Are you following my point here? We cannot disregard the huge double standard our society has. We cannot make life so arbitrary that something is only human if it is wanted. And why is there even a double standard? It's because we know, and our society knows deep down, that a fetus is a human life. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this double standard. No matter how much they try to deny it, the very fact that there is hypocrisy and contradiction here is another case for life. And now that we've established when life begins, we also need to be aware of what abortion entails. And I know this is going to be gruesome, and this is something very few people actually know the details of, but this can be pivotal in our discussions. I've personally witnessed people, when I studied nursing, change their minds about abortion the moment they found out what actually happened. when they found out that this happens at the point where a fetus can feel pain. And there are multiple different kinds of abortions, and for the sake of time, I can't go into them all in detail, but I do have resources available, pro-life resources, for those who want to read more on the issue and want to learn a lot more about what actually happens. And I've listed these in order of stage. So the first ones happen at the earliest point, and the last ones are late term. I should also note that every single one of these, contrary to what culture will tell you, poses a risk to the mother. A risk of hemorrhaging, which is heavy bleeding, or infertility, and pregnancy loss, future pregnancy loss due to physical trauma influenced during an abortion. There's a risk of sepsis, a raft of many other complications. And these abortions, I told someone this morning, and the moment I said it, they had tears in their eyes. These abortions can all be arranged by simply calling an 0800 number here in New Zealand. I could call an 0800 number and say, hey, I'm pregnant, I don't want it, and they'd make me an appointment straight away. So the first one we have is a chemical abortion. That's the abortion pill. So this kills the baby. It induces contractions to expel the baby, and the mother usually finds the body parts in the toilet. The next is a suction abortion. So this is where the cervix is dilated and a suction device is inserted into the woman and tears the baby's body apart, sucking it through a tube that's 20 times more powerful than a household vacuum cleaner. It goes through that tube and it is dumped into a container. And this is the most common method of surgical abortion within the first 12 weeks. The next is a D&C, or a dilation and curettage, and this occurs up until the 12th week. So again, the cervix is dilated, and a curette, which is a sharp knife with a loop on it, is inserted into the uterus. The baby's body is cut into pieces and then pulled out by suction. The next is a dilation and evacuation, so it's very similar. This is committed till the 18th week. Forceps are inserted into the uterus. These forceps will grab each limb, clamp down, and pull and twist until it is ripped apart. The last step of a D&C abortion is to use a pair of forceps to crush the skull. When a white liquid leaks out, they know they have crushed the brain. The doctor will then place the body parts on a table and count to make sure they've got everything. And those are the most common. The next are less common, but they are still performed. There's a hysterectomy abortion. This is not a hysterectomy. It's a hysterectomy abortion. And the womb is entered. It's very similar to a C-section, but the umbilical cord is cut while the baby is still in the womb, cutting off its oxygen supply, causing suffocation. And sometimes the baby is delivered and left to die unattended. The next is a saline injection. These are now uncommon, but they used to be very popular, and they were actually preferred by abortionists. A salt solution was injected through the abdomen into the amniotic fluid. The fetus ingests this salt solution and dies of salt poisoning, dehydration, and hemorrhaging of the brain. The skin is burned off. A dead or dying baby is delivered, and a baby born alive is again left unattended to die. But there are some saline abortion survivors, and I would highly recommend you look up the testimonies of these people who have survived and gone on to be pro-life advocates. The last one I'll mention is a late-term abortion. And this is anywhere between 18 weeks to the day before birth or the day of birth, where this fetus, this unborn child, is fully viable. It is completely legal in New Zealand under the guise of medical necessity, which I need to tell you is actually far more grey area than our lawmakers would like to insist. This is not life-threatening instances. This is anything that you could claim causes mental harm to the mother or mental stress to the mother. Now, do we have any mothers in the room? Can you raise your hand if you're a mother? How many of you have ever felt mentally stressed around childbirth? I think it's safe to say mental stress can apply to any mother giving birth. So this abortion is a minimum 3-day process where a woman will have rods inserted into the cervix to begin dilation. She'll go back, and in her second appointment, the abortionist will inject a drug into the fetus's heart, causing cardiac arrest. The mother, after this, will now be carrying a dead child. And on the 4th day, she'll go back again, and she will have to go through the entire birthing process to deliver a stillborn baby. These abortions happen in our country. And some of these abortions are unsuccessful, and a baby is accidentally born alive. We might be thinking, wow, okay, they've got a chance. They've been born alive, they've survived this, right? And when this late-term abortion bill was passed, an amendment was proposed to require the doctors to give this live baby medical treatment. It's outside the womb, it's fully viable, it has survived. And this was voted down by 80 members of our parliament. So now the baby, the crying baby, will be left unattended, discarded to die. This is happening in our country right now. And writing this made me want to both cry and throw up, and saying it still does. And I'm sure it evoked a similar response in you. I can see a lot of your faces. Why? If this is truly okay, why does this make us squirm? It's because we all have a conscience. This is what we are fighting to stop. This is what we are praying to end. 2.8 billion unborn children have experienced one of these. Which leaves our last question: is this ever justified? I was going to title this point "Answering the Cultural Objections," but in all honesty, I don't know where a lot of you guys are in your beliefs. There's every chance that as you heard this, your heart still tugged at the thought of rape victims, young teens, women whose health complications made pregnancy incredibly difficult, laws forcing them to keep their child. I understand, and this is what makes this a really difficult topic. It is sensitive and it is painful. It's raw, and I understand that. And this is also where the challenge moves from biology to philosophy. Yes, we've come to realize gestating humans are alive, but are they as valuable as born humans? Is abortion, hard as it is, ever justified? Are there medically necessary abortions? So we're going to answer some of these common objections. We're going to start with the most common one, and probably the most sensitive one, is what about in the cases of sexual assault or in rape? This is the most sensitive conversation you can have about abortion, and you need to approach this lovingly. I cannot stress that enough. Oh, what is happening? There we go. I can't stress this enough. Oh. Are we good? No. There we go. Yeah, you need to approach these lovingly. And the person you are speaking to may have this as part of their story, or someone very close to them. And please never lose sight of this. So I would first start by asking the person, if they are saying this, is this part of your story? Because that will dictate your response. Quoting statistics, if it is part of their story, will do very little for your conversation. You will seem very cold and very insensitive, and probably hurt them by hearing one of the hardest things that has ever happened to them, and you just meet them with stats. And if you're speaking with someone who has no personal experience with this, and this is something I face a lot, they're simply using it as an objection, there are quite a few ways to approach that. And to start, I would say that these cases account for about 1% of all abortions. I also go on to explain that in the cases of sexual assault, there are three people involved. 2 of them are innocent. Why then are we punishing one of those innocent parties because of the criminal's actions? I then go on to say abortion actually benefits the rapist more than anyone else. There are many testimonies of girls and women who were assaulted and then were driven to and dropped off at abortion facilities by their assaulter to destroy the evidence, so they'd never be caught. This happened against the woman's will. In fact, in these cases of sexual assault, the mother is statistically more likely to keep the child than aborted. Why? Because experiencing even more trauma is the last thing that mother wants or needs. Another violent act on her body. And there are many testimonies of women online who have said that that baby, that child, was the only light that could have come from such a dark situation. And at the end of the day, if someone still doesn't agree as you walk them through this, you need to go back to those first points we made. Ending the life of an innocent human being is always wrong. Abortion is ending the life of an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is always wrong. This mother in this situation needs love and care, and abortion does not give her the healing she needs and deserves. There are other options. So what about now in medical cases? Cases where the mother's life might be in danger if she continues to carry the child. This accounts now for about 6% of abortions. And again, for the sake of time, I can't go into every single medical case, but all you need to remember is one thing: intent. All of these situations depend on the intent. So I'll tell you now, there is no medical situation where you need to intentionally end the life of the child for the mother to survive. Note my wording there. There is no medical situation where you need to intentionally end the life of a child for the mother to survive. Yes, there are cases where a mother cannot continue to carry the child. It happens. And in these cases, she may need to give birth prematurely. That may be extremely prematurely. That baby may not survive outside of the womb, but that is not an abortion. It's a tragedy, but it is not an abortion. The doctor went in with the intent to save both lives. One was tragically lost. It is completely it's completely different to going in with the intent to end a life, which is abortion. So why don't we shift this conversation to try and save both lives instead of intentionally ending one? I also need to note that these medical cases are at their worst, so they most commonly occur in late term, nearing birth. But an emergency C-section takes about 1 hour. Do you remember how long that late-term abortion took? 3 to 4 days. So if a mother is in an emergency situation, which one is better medically for the mother? The emergency C-section. So there's no justification for a late-term abortion, even under medical necessity. The third most common one, this is one I've had from my friends. The third most, abortions will happen regardless, and if they're legal, at least they're safe. This is absolutely untrue. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, the person whose statistic this claim is based off, was an abortion provider who later became a pro-life activist after realizing he was killing human life. He admitted that he and other major abortion industry leaders invented fake figures to claim that thousands of women are dying annually from unsafe abortions. This simply isn't true. He explains, "We fed the public a line of deceit, dishonesty, a fabrication of statistics and figures. We succeeded in breaking down the laws limiting abortions because the time was right and the news media cooperated. We sensationalized the effects of illegal abortions and fabricated polls which indicated that 85% of the public favored unrestricted abortion, when we knew it was only 5%. We unashamedly lied, and yet our statements were quoted by the media as though they had been written in law." This objection that abortions are going to happen regardless, thousands of women have died from illegal abortions, is founded on a lie. It is not true, and again, it doesn't take away from the fact of abortion intentionally ending an innocent human life. Now, those are the three biggest objections, and I had to narrow it down to the ones I've faced most commonly, but there are a raft of more objections. So if you do have questions about those and how to answer those, feel free to ask me personally or at the Q&A later. But I want you guys to remember that as you approach these conversations and as you try to speak the truth in love, you'll naturally fall into one of these two categories. I'd like to ask you this: do you speak with great compassion without speaking the truth? Or do you speak with hard truth without compassion? Take a second to share with the person next to you. Which side do you naturally find yourself leaning towards in these conversations? Go. Let's come back together. How many of you lean more towards the first one? We figured out that my parents actually are both sides, so they balance each other out. How many of you lean towards the second one? I had a feeling I'd get this more in Southland. I don't know if that's a bad thing. But, okay, for the person who resonates the most with the first one, remember that the most loving thing, the most compassionate thing you can do is to be truthful. Remember that in the thing you can do is to be truthful. Remember that in this issue, lives are at stake. I want to ask you, who are you serving by refraining from telling the truth? Are you serving the world or are you serving God? I encourage you to remember Paul's words from Galatians. "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? If I were still seeking the approval of man, I would not be a servant of Christ." We can't sit idly and watch this happen. Yes, we need to be people of prayer, but we can't only sit and pray about this in our rooms and do nothing. Tozer wisely said, prayer becomes effective when we stop using it as a substitute for obedience. Speak up about this. Push back on culture, on our lawmakers. Have these conversations as tough as they are. Do not hide the truth because you're trying to be compassionate. It's not compassionate and it's not loving. For the person who resonates with the second, always remember compassion. Compassion, compassion, compassion as you are having these conversations, because you have no idea what someone's story is. And most of the time, the person you are talking to will be expecting a Christian who is cold and harsh and cruel. This is what the culture tells them we are like. And they will expect someone who is going to call them names for what they've done or what they support. So I think if we claim to know Christ, we should be people of compassion and concern towards these people we're engaging with. And at the forefront of your mind should be the mercy that you have received from the Lord. Remember, in these conversations, this is something that Brendan Malone shared in a recent conference. He said, if it wasn't for the grace of God, any one of you could have found yourself with abortion as part of your story. Remember also that research consistently shows us women who have chosen abortion have felt pressured by circumstances, by their parents, by their partner. Women in New Zealand have been driven to get an abortion they didn't want at the age of 16, dropped off by their parents, dropped off by their boyfriend. And you just don't know someone's story, so be gentle and compassionate as you engage in these conversations. Yes, share the truth. Yes, share the reality of abortion and seek to change their mind to see the sanctity of life. But do it wisely, do it gently, and with great love. The moment that you become cold and callous, you've lost them. And for both people, the most important thing here is not about winning a pro-choice or a pro-life argument. It is about protecting life and pointing people to the gospel. Yes, we should be advocating for law change and voting for politicians who want to protect the unborn. But in your day-to-day conversations on abortion, you can absolutely segue this conversation into a conversation about the gospel. You're talking about morality, about God's design. You're talking about creation and the conscience. This is a moral issue. You can absolutely segue this into a conversation. And if this is part of your story, whether you're a man or a woman, everyone is impacted by this. But if this is personally a part of your story or someone you know, never forget that true and ultimate redemption and restoration can be found in Christ alone. I actually have friends, a couple, who decided to have an abortion when they were young and in love. They were not Christians at the time. And now, since coming to Christ, they run one of the coolest apologetics pro-life ministries I've seen. And they counsel women. They look after pregnant mothers who have unwanted babies. And they have used their story, their painful story, for God's glory. So if this is part of your story, you can do the same. You can use it for God's glory. So let's collectively engage in these conversations, and one by one, let's create a culture that values the lives of the unborn, who celebrates the miracle that is pregnancy, the beauty of motherhood. Maybe we can begin by volunteering or donating to pro-life organizations and pregnancy help centers. Wilberforce also said, "Let it not be said that I was silent when they needed me." And as I said at the beginning, having heard all of this, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you did not know. Let's pray. Father, our hearts just break to hear these things, Lord, to hear what is happening so close to home, Father, that innocent lives are being ripped apart because we don't have a culture that celebrates life, that seeks to protect unborn life, Lord. And I just pray that you would work in our hearts to compel us by the love of Christ to go out and share, to go and engage in these hard conversations, Lord, that we would not put our comfort first, Father, but we would put your gospel first, that we would go out and have these hard conversations with people who disagree with us, Lord, and you would help us to do so with gentleness and with grace, but also to share the real truth of life in the womb, Lord, life that begins at conception and the beauty of motherhood.